world is the United States, as if the United States can determine if Iran is a great nation or not, just shows the mentality of U.S. elite, or an implicit threat to attack Iran. You can see in his words. This is the mentality of the United States. And of course, Witkoff is a Zionist Jew. And if you watch the rest of the interview, I didn't watch the whole interview, but I watched parts of it. And for example, when he speaks about Hamas, he calls all of Iran's allies across the region terrorists, but he says that Jolani, who just carried out sectarian slaughter in Syria, he called him a different, he's a changed man. Uh, that, I think, says a lot about the situation inside the United States. Or Witkoff blames Hamas, but Hamas simply wants the implementation of the agreement that Witkoff was behind. He was the person who uh, brought about the ceasefire the day before Trump was inaugurated. So uh, the second phase of the ceasefire has not been implemented. The was not being implemented. The and is not the whole thing has fallen apart now. But until the Israelis carried out this new wave of slaughter, the Israeli regime was not implementing the second round, the second phase. It was not implementing the first phase. It was not allowing mobile homes to get into, or tents to get into Gaza, or heavy equipment so that they could remove the rubble. They weren't allowing uh, all sorts of supplies to get into Gaza, despite the fact that it was a part of the ceasefire agreement. But what does Witkoff do? Witkoff goes and blames Hamas for not accepting his change to the agreement. So the United States, which is a part of this genocide, which is carrying out this genocide, is not an honest broker, and it cannot pretend to be an honest broker. Just like in uh, the situation with Ukraine, the United States pretends that it is uh, the middleman between Ukraine and Russia, whereas the United States was behind Ukraine, regardless of what Trump's policies are today. So the problem between Iran and the United States, I think, more than anything else, Nima, has to do with mentality. This US mentality of exceptionalism, of superiority, of looking down at others. And the second is that the United States is not reliable. Trump is not reliable. Let's just go to the Hamas and Israeli agreement. Uh, Witkoff was behind it. How can Witkoff, who himself is behind the agreement, basically change the agreement? And Trump, of course, reject the agreement altogether when he says all the Palestinians must go. How can he do that and then expect Iran to trust the United States at the negotiating table? Because in order for negotiations to happen, there has to be trust. There has to be a degree of trust. If I have, if you have zero trust in me to sell a house, to sell a car, to buy a house, to buy a car, something like that, a business, you can't sign an agreement with me because you know that I'm looking for a way to cheat you. I will try to undermine you. You have to have a minimal amount of trust in me in order to trust, and you have to verify it, and you have to make sure that everything is done carefully so that I don't cheat, but you have to have a minimal amount of trust. The problem is that the United States is completely untrustworthy. Uh, Even the Canadians cannot trust it under Trump. Even uh, Greenland cannot trust it, Trump. Panama, I'm sure, has a few things to say about Trump as well. So, under these circumstances, how could negotiations be possible when Witkoff himself, after just a few weeks, is undermining his own agreement when it comes to Gaza? Well, Iran is looking, Iran is watching Witkoff, Iran is watching the United States, and it sees that an agreement that was put together with Witkoff behind it has been unraveled, and Witkoff is taking sides with the Israeli regime that has been violating the deal and which is carrying out genocide. And he speaks about Netanyahu's successes in murdering Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. So he speaks as an Israeli. He's speaking as if he is on the Israeli side, which he is, of course. He may have disagreements with Netanyahu on certain issues, but he's not a broker. He's not a middleman, and he's not someone who has so far shown himself to be a reliable partner for any form of agreement. I don't know what lies ahead, but so far, the United States has not shown any sign that it wants to be reasonable, that it's serious about a deal that can be implemented, and that the Iranians can be confident that it can be implemented. Otherwise, for the Iranians, it doesn't matter who's in charge in the White House. Trump is for Iran is no different than Biden. Both are have shown themselves not to be men of peace. Trump has in Gaza by supporting the new wave of genocide. He has shown himself not to be a man of peace. The bombing of Yemen, which we've seen women and children being killed, we've seen images of children being killed. Uh, it shows that he is not a man of peace. So that all that aside, the only thing that's left is for Trump to do a deal. But to do a deal, you have to build some sort of credibility as a deal maker and a person who when he signs a deal, who when he that he implements that deal, and that so far within this very short period of time, in the case of Gaza, and in Lebanon, by the way, where the U.S. is a guarantor to the ceasefire, and the Israelis are constantly killing people in Lebanon, the United States has shown itself to be unworthy of being a negotiating partner.
In when he talked about the Gaza and the ceasefire between Israelis and Palestinians, what was so amazing to me that he talked with an Israeli commander who showed him a video in which was beheaded children. I don't know the same sort of propaganda, the same sort of videos that nobody has ever seen since they were talking about these sort of, I don't know, actions and attitude on the part of Hamas. But you don't see, on the other hand, there he didn't talk with any commander or any political figure in Hamas. And this is so amazing to me why he didn't try to talk with them, with Hamas. And he said that he's talking with them by through Qataris and some people in Qatar. And why is not why he wasn't able to talk directly with Hamas?
Well, you also raised a very good point. He lied about the beheadings. He has not seen any film about beheadings. This is the film that I'm sure you recall. Early on, the Israelis said they put together and they showed to a few chosen group, a number of chosen groups of people, their allies basically, and they'd come out and they'd all say how horrible it is. The fact is that there is no footage of beheadings, as you rightly pointed out. There is no footage of rapes. That's all nonsense. That these are all lies that the Israelis put together, and the Western media went with it because they're with the Israelis. They wanted to justify the Holocaust, and for months they kept pushing it, and they still push it, as we've seen in the case of Witkoff. So Witkoff is lying just like Biden lied. Remember when Biden said he saw pictures of babies that were beheaded, and then the White House had to retract it, and later on he said it again. Witkoff here is obviously lying, but aside from that, uh, yes, how can you? The question is, how can you be a peacemaker when you're not speaking with one side of the conflict? Qatar is not a reliable representative for Hamas. Qatar has its own interests. Qatar's part of Qatar's interest is to be in the good books of Trump. Qatar and the Emirates and Saudi Arabia do not have good ties. Right now, Trump is tilting towards Saudi Arabia in this in the Persian Gulf region, whatever that means. And The Emirates, we saw that they said they're going to invest $1.5 trillion in the United States over the next 10 years, $1.5 trillion that they don't have. But but in any case, Qatar has its own interests to pursue. It's not the interests of Hamas necessarily, and often we see that it's definitely not in the same as the Hamas interest. So by refusing to negotiate with Hamas, he just shows that he is not a uh, reliable middleman. He is not a broker. He is with one side. And throughout the talk with Tucker Carlson, um, he was obviously siding with the Israelis. He never said anything about the genocide, the ongoing genocide. Of course, I haven't watched the whole thing, but from what I saw, I think it's fair to say. If I'm wrong, correct me, please. But uh, that's how the United States works, and I don't think this is going to succeed. The United States still fails to recognize that the world has changed, and Trump wants to make America great again, which is an acknowledgement that the United States is not great, or at least it's not great as it used to be. And but within a few weeks, how have things become so great again that his behavior is like that of an emperor who dictates terms? We can do this. Basically what Witkoff was saying is that we can do this the easy way, or we can do it the hard way. That's not how you negotiate. And I think the United States will find out the hard way that this is not going to work. The only thing is that the United States is going to cause probably harm to everyone. Uh, not that it's going to necessarily be a military conflict. I still find that unlikely because the United States would be very foolish to go down that road. It would destroy their own economy. It would destroy the world economy. But antagonizing Iran will force Iran to push back. And the United States isn't in an ideal situation to constantly uh, intensify conflict across the globe. It already has more than enough on its plate. And if Trump wants to rebuild America, that's not how he's supposed to do it. And this is all happening while China continues to be at peace with the rest of the world, and it continues to deal with its problems and at home, and its economy continues to grow.
Here is the second part of what Witkoff said, Professor.
Sanctioned and and being able to grow their economy. Their economy. I mean, these are very smart people. Their economy was once a wonderful economy. They're being strangled and suffocated today. There's no need for that to happen. They can join the League of Nations, and we can have a better relationship and grow that relationship. And that's what he's presenting. That's the alternative he's presenting. I think he wants to deal with Iran with respect. He wants to build trust with them if it's possible. And that's his directive to his administration. And hopefully that will be met positively by the Iranians. And I'm certainly hopeful for it. I think anything can be solved with dialogue by clearing up misconception and miscommunication and disconnects between people. I believe that, by the way. And yet, and the president is a president who doesn't want to go to war. And he'll use military action to stop a war. That's when he actually wants to use military action. In this particular case, hopefully it won't be necessary. Hopefully we can do it at the negotiating table.
Yeah.
So he would use the military to stop the war. So the United States invaded Iraq, basically. It doesn't make sense what he says. Or he spoke about the Iranian economy. In fact, the Iranian economy, when the United States ruled over Iran for decades, and the British before them, was terrible. The Iranian even though Iran was exporting huge amounts of oil, the Shah of Iran was basically spending huge amounts of money purchasing American weapons. Of course, the United States wanted that, but the country did not have its decisions were not made in Tehran. Its economy was definitely not doing well. More than half of the girls in Iran were not even going to school under this Shah. And I don't even want to go into the Shah's mentality towards women, because he basically said women should just look pretty and shut up, basically. There's an interview about him speaking on women online that people could look at. So this very so-called progressive Shah was someone who did really nothing but harm to Iran. But that's what the United States wants. The United States wants the sort of country that can be milked, like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a huge amount of oil wealth. But if it goes to war with the most impoverished, when it invades and tries to destroy and carries out a genocidal war against the poorest country in the world, meaning Yemen, it fails. Why? Because the United States has done nothing for Saudi Arabia. It is a vulnerable and weak and broken country that can spend its dollars, but it cannot even uh, create a defense capability that can lead it to this, some slight. They lost the war against Yemen. They not only did they fail in winning the war, but ultimately the Saudis had to accept the ceasefire when Yemen began to destroy key Saudi oil installations. So that is the end result of U.S. domination in any country. And but in any case, if the United States were to treat Iran with respect, and the words of um, Trump, as explained by Witkoff, do not indicate that, and the words of Witkoff do not indicate that. And again, going back to what Witkoff said uh, about Giuliani being a changed man, about everyone else being a terrorist, about Hamas's position being unacceptable, basically meaning it's unacceptable for Hamas to insist on what Witkoff himself accepted before. That is not a good indication, to say the least. And that is why Iran does not negotiate with the United States. That's why we do not have direct negotiation. He spoke about back channels. Back channels have always existed. Iran has always uh, been, and the United States they've always sent messages back and forth through different back channels. So that's nothing new. No one should be uh, surprised there. But the reason why Iran is not negotiating with the United States is because the United States is speaking using the language of threats. The United States uh, does not recognize Iran's sovereign rights. And right after this interview, by the way, I think I didn't see I didn't look in detail because it's the Iranian New Year, so I've been very busy with other things. But apparently, the U.S. National Security Advisor, if I'm not mistaken, he said that the position of the United States is that Iran has to give up its nuclear program. Well, that's not what Witkoff says in this interview. It's very different from what he says, and that shows that if the United States cannot respect Iran's sovereign right within the framework of the NPT, then I think that's a non-starter. We cannot even talk with Americans. Iran's rights within the NPT have to be fully preserved. As long as Iran is in the NPT, Iran doesn't have any intention to leave, because Iran does not have an intention to build a nuclear weapon. And as Iranians have said many times, that Iran does not want to have a nuclear weapon, and the only way in which that would Iran's nuclear posture would change would be if there is some sort of existential threat against Iran through some sort of nuclear strike or a potential nuclear strike. Then things would change, obviously, as it would change in any sane country. But but as long as Iran is in the NPT, and Iran can legally withdraw from the NPT, as long as Iran is in the NPT, Iran will abide by its commitments to the NPT. And as we speak, the Iranians are abiding by their requirements within the framework of international law.
Witkoff is talking about building trust between the two nations, and do you think that what would be the basic, what would be the most simple thing to do when it comes to the relationship between Iran and the United States? What is the missing piece in your opinion?
Implementing the ceasefire in Gaza, the ceasefire agreement that was agreed upon and implemented right before Trump came to office. Implement the ceasefire agreement in Lebanon. The Israeli regime has just, within the last, I think, 48 hours, murdered 8 Lebanese citizens. The Hezbollah has not violated the ceasefire, but the Israelis are constantly killing Lebanese citizens. Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the others have not violated the ceasefire, but now the Israeli regime is carrying out a genocide. And Witkoff says nothing about this. A slaughter is taking place as he was doing the interview, but it's as if it's not important. If Witkoff wants to be taken seriously, then we have to see how what he has already negotiated is implemented. I think that's first and foremost. For the Iranians, it's every night in the Iranian news, unlike on the BBC and CNN and Fox News and the New York Times and the Washington Post and Breitbart, the top news story, international news story, is Gaza, is the atrocities being carried out by the Israeli regime. So for Iran, it's of course Turkey is also now in the news too, but on consistently the top news story has always been Gaza. So Witkoff, he is responsible for this genocide right now. He is the person who pushed forward the ceasefire. The ceasefire has been implemented by the terrorists, as he calls them, but it's not being implemented by his uh, allies. Is because, as I said, he's a Zionist. He's a Jewish Zionist, and that says more than enough.
Do you think that the situation in Turkey would bring some sort of complication in the situation in Gaza? What is happening in your opinion? What is happening on the ground in Turkey in terms of what the new sort of protests in Turkey?
I don't think it has any impact on Gaza because Erdogan has never helped the Palestinian people. He he has not sent weapons to Gaza. He is not. Uh, he's doing business with Netanyahu. He continues to sell, transport oil uh, throughout the genocide. He's been doing this. Uh, Turkish Airways continues to fly to Tel Aviv, even though Ansarullah has warned all foreign airlines to stop travel, stop sending, to stop flights from to and from the regime. But Turkey does the exact opposite. So what is happening in Turkey has no positive or negative impact on Gaza. It may have an impact on Syria because I'm sure the terrorist groups are worried about what's happening in Ankara and Istanbul and elsewhere. But I think what is happening in Turkey weakens Turkey significantly. I don't expect uh, Erdogan to be removed from power, for these people to carry out some sort of revolution. That's just not possible. But I think it weakens Turkey a lot. It will weaken the Turkish economy. Uh, just from looking at Iran, I know that a lot of Iranians are no longer traveling to Turkey. This is a short-term consequence, but you can uh, sort of understand the broader economic implications about what's going on. However, Turkey is in a very it's in a I think for many of us who are critical of Mr. Erdogan, it's very difficult to be optimistic because Erdogan has supported Salafist and Wahhabi terrorists and will continue to do so. And I think this will have very negative implications for security across Asia. Uh, and that's probably, I mean, I'm sure that's what the Americans want. But on the other hand, his rival, uh, he has spoken negatively about the resistance in Gaza. So those who are cheering on uh, President Erdogan's adversary, his chief adversary, uh, should be careful for what they wish for. It's really a choice. I mean, the people of Turkey are fantastic people. I've traveled there often. I've been to different conferences. They come here. They're wonderful people, and they have a wonderful culture, and it's very similar to Iran, as I'm sure you know. The culture and many they're Sufis, so it's very similar to Iranian culture, religious culture. But at the moment, I think it's between bad and worse, meaning the two sides. That's how it seems. I don't taking what we've heard from taking the statements made by Hamas being a terrorist organization by members of the opposition. Of course, the opposition is fragmented and diverse, and there are people within the opposition that are very pro-Palestinian and in fact attack Erdogan for not doing enough for the people of Gaza and not for not breaking ties. But from my understanding, and your viewers should look this up and correct me if I'm wrong. I think the former mayor of Istanbul, called Hamas a terror organization.
If we assume that the main one of
I can't see the chats, but if someone does correct me, do let me know because I don't want to say anything that's factually incorrect.
yeah. When it comes to Erdogan and his support for Wahhabis, for ISIS, and does he really care about the opinion of Iran and Russia on these groups, and which are of a huge concern for Russia and Iran? Does he care about that?
The problem with President Erdogan and many people there's always been this debate about Mr. Erdogan in Iran. Some say he's a great politician because he's always playing one side against another. But others, and I tend to agree with the second group, say that he is seen as not having any principles because he will do an agreement with you and then he will betray you and do an agreement with the other side, then he'll betray the other side and do an agreement with you. And in the short term, that has advantages. But in the long term, it is both unprincipled, but it creates an environment where no one trusts you. And right now, Mr. Erdogan, I think, is someone who no one trusts. So if someone has an agreement with him, I don't think anyone will be counting on that agreement being implemented or preserved in the long run necessarily. Because if he speaks to someone else, then things will change. And I mean, there are many examples, but the fact, if you recall, when he sent the Ukrainian POWs back to Ukraine, these Azov neo-Nazi prisoners that the Russians gave to Turkey, without Russian permission, he sent them to Ukraine. That's just, a small example. It's not very important, but it's basically how he works. So I don't think that well, at times he has shown uh, a great deal of friendship with Iran and with Russia, and at times he's tilted away from both of them or one of them. So it's difficult to say. I'm sure Russia and Iran are very important for him because being opposed to Iran and Russia would be very costly. But I don't think that he has. I don't think he has a fixed position on uh, any potential partner. He shifts and changes, and that makes him an unreliable partner.
For the case of Yemen and what's
I mean,
going
just one
on.
example. In Syria, ISIS and Al Qaeda, uh, the Iranians and the Russians agreed uh, with Erdogan to allow these terrorists to stay in Idlib. Why? Because Erdogan was worried about the implications of them being pushed into Turkey and Turkish stability. And so the Iranians and the Russians agreed that they would stay there so that it would not cause any internal problems for Turkey. That was one reason. There are a host of issues that were negotiated and issues, but that was one key issue that Turkey said, well, if you push them out of Syria, then they're automatically inside my country. And the Iranians and the Russians don't want to see an unstable Turkey. They don't want to see uh, terror acts where people inside Turkey are are killed. So they agreed. But what did Erdogan do? He used that as a uh, foothold. He retrained and regrouped these people and brought in thousands more foreign fighters from China, from Uzbekistan, from Tajikistan, from across Central Asia, from Russia, and he deployed them to take over Syria. Of course, I don't think he didn't expect Syria to fall, but in any case, he wanted to expand uh, the rule of ISIS and Al Qaeda in northern Syria so that he could negotiate with the stronger hand with the Syrian government. But the Syrian government collapsed, and everything changed.
It seems that the war in Yemen and the way that Trump was fighting Yemenis in the Red Sea is because of putting pressure on Iran again. Do you see it in that sort of attitude, or you see it differently? You see it in a different way? Is that related to what's going on between Iran and the United States?
Well, you actually raised an interesting point. Witkoff, again, I didn't watch all of what he said, and so I apologize because I didn't know it was going to come up so much in our discussion. Witkoff actually, again, from the bits and pieces that I've read, seemed to be saying that the resistance has been destroyed or weakened severely, and so ultimately Iran shouldn't be that powerful anymore. But on the other hand, we see that the focus is on weakening Iran. So it's somewhat if the resistance, if the axis of resistance has been demolished and has been weakened so much, then why on so much insistence on having a confrontational approach with Iran and all the threats and so on? But I agree. I think that the war in Yemen or the genocidal attacks on Yemen have probably three purposes. One is to make the United States look strong, and that's how America works. And presidents in the United States get popular when they bomb countries. That is one of the sickening things about American society today. Of course, it's the mass media, the corporate media or the legacy media that mainstream media that pushes this narrative. But in any case, leaders in the United States become popular when they attack countries, when they bomb countries. Even Trump, during the height of Russia, yeah, the anti-Russia sentiments in the United States being promoted by the Democrats and his opposition, and RussiaGate. When he bombed Syria, suddenly the mainstream media supported him. Till until then, he was illegitimate and a foreign agent, and then they were rooting for him all overnight because he was, firing missiles at Damascus and other cities. That's sadly how it is. So, in the case of Yemen, I think part of it is to look strong, especially since Trump is going to have to give huge concessions to Russia uh, to achieve any sort of peace agreement. So I think that is a distraction. Second is to help the Israeli regime because the siege on in the Red Sea is costly. The Ansarullah is blocking the Red Sea to ships destined to Israeli regime ports, and because they blocked food inside Gaza, and this was before the genocide began again. So uh, so they're trying to help the Americans. What the Americans are doing is that they're bombing Yemen so that Israel could more easily carry out genocide. That's basically it. And the third reason is it's sort of like sending a message to Iran that we're bombing Yemen and look, you're next or you're potentially next. But the point is that, or the issue is that the United States has failed so far in Yemen, and it's not as if Biden didn't try. Biden regularly bombed the country. He regularly carried out airstrikes and slaughtered people across the country. And it's very costly for the United States because this is They have to bring ships to each of those aircraft carriers and other ships. It's very costly for them to be there. When the planes when they fly to bomb the people of Yemen, it's very costly. These airstrikes, especially since the aircraft carrier has to move far away from Yemen to protect itself. And every time Yemen strikes back with drones and missiles that are very inexpensive, high tech but inexpensive, the Americans have to use very expensive missiles to defend themselves. So this is going to be very costly, and ultimately the Americans are going to fail. So instead of sending a message that frightens Iran, what it's doing is it's sending a message that the Americans thought they can do something, but they're miscalculating, and they have miscalculated.
Does Yemen have indigenous capabilities of producing their arms?
Yes, Yemen is a very sophisticated society. It is maybe the oldest civilization on this planet, and they are very smart people. They have universities. They have very innovative people, and they had a military industry before all this began. And I'm sure that the Iranians are assisting them, which they should, and the Iranians do not hide it. But it's not as if it's all the Iranian. It's just Iranian assistance. These people have huge capabilities. This is a government. The government of Yemen, which controls the capital, is running a country, and part of their responsibility, or one of their responsibilities, is to develop an indigenous defense capability. Because we saw the Saudis and the Emiratis, with Western support, carry out a 7-year genocidal war. And then we saw the Americans constantly bomb Yemen when Yemen tried to stop the genocide in Gaza. So obviously, they're going to develop their capabilities, and Iran will assist them. But it's not as if Iran is sending weapons there. I mean, the Americans have been trying to impose a siege on Yemen for a decade now. The Iranians are obviously assisting them, but Yemen has its capabilities, which are deep, deep underground. The country is not small, it is large, it is mountainous. People are smart, it has a large population, uh, relatively speaking. And therefore, I think a victory for the United States under these circumstances is just not possible.
And how about the Arab League? They ask all of the countries who have economic ties with Israel should just put an end to those sort of ties. But th- are they really honest in the way that they're picturing, on the way they're asking for this sort of attitude?
None of the countries that have had ties with the Israeli regimes have done anything about those ties. Turkey is its business with Israel. I mean, they have direct flights. How bad can it get? How awful could Mr. Erdogan be when it comes to Palestine? If Turkey alone, if the government in Turkey decided to break off ties with Israel, if you complement, if that would, alongside what the resistance is doing, would be a severe blow to the regime. Just Turkey alone. But he refuses to do that. Egypt, business as usual. Jordan, business as usual. The Emirates, more than business as usual. And Saudi Arabia allows Jordan uh, to be, it allows its territory to be used by Jordan to do trade with the Israeli regime. So no, none of the, and of course now we see a regime has come into power in Syria, which has allowed the Israelis to occupy huge amounts of its territory, and the regime is not at all interested in supporting the Palestinian cause. So there's nothing serious going on in the Arab world when it comes to, among the rulers, when it comes to defending the Palestinian people. That could change. That could change, and this is something that I firmly believe. What the Israeli regime is doing by restarting this genocide is only putting more pressure on these regimes. It's making them look less legitimate. If Just let me give you the example of Mr. Erdogan. If Erdogan was sincere in his support for the Palestinian people. And he doesn't have to make sacrifices like the Iranians to get be sanctioned, to be or it's to be attacked. All he has to do is cut off all ties with the Israeli regime. The economic damage that it would do to Turkey would be not that big, but his popularity would have strengthened significantly, not only at home but also abroad. And I think that he would have been under his position would have been different today uh, with regards to protests. I mean, his opponents, I know that they have always despised him, but a segment of his supporters have left him, and that is because they see him as unprincipled. So, I think he's harmed himself also by politically by not breaking off ties with the Israeli regime. But he's under less pressure and he's threatened less than Jordan. The regime in Jordan is despised. People know what's going on. They know that the regime is complicit, or Egypt, or and elsewhere. Ultimately, that could lead to consequences. We've already seen the Mubarak fall in Egypt less than 2 decades ago. It's not something that's impossible to imagine happening again and elsewhere as well.
What's happening, and many people do not know about the nature of the support coming from Iran and Yemen to Gaza, that people in Iran and in Yemen mostly are Shia Muslim, and the people in Gaza are mostly Sunni Muslim. And how is that when we look at the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain is mostly Shia, by the way, and these countries who are mostly Sunni, and do you think that they're feeling much pressure from the public opinion? Are they gonna? You mentioned that no, the sort of renewed attacks on Gaza. Are they gonna face huge, I don't know, sort of protests in their country in terms of what's going on in Gaza? Are they going to face that? Are they going to experience that if that goes on and on in Gaza?
Well, we have to also remember that the Republic of Azerbaijan is a Shia country, but the dictatorship there is selling inexpensive oil to Israel. They are allies, and they just signed an agreement to develop potential oil fields, or to 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 find new gas fields, and to find new try to discover new gas reserves in the Mediterranean together. So. And there's a lot of discontent in the Republic of Azerbaijan because of this. And I think the same is true elsewhere. I mean, what the Americans have done over the past 40 some years is that they've used oil and gas rich regimes in the Persian Gulf region in particular to create sectarian and racial hostility. We saw that a lot during the war when Saddam invaded Iran. Anti, they the media was spreading chauvinism against non-Arabs and Iranians in particular. Then increasingly we saw Wahhabism and Salafism being promoted by many. There are hundreds of television channels, and we saw that in particular in 2011 and 12 being spread by basically all of these countries in the Persian Gulf uh, against Shias, and it was extraordinary. Disinformation and hatred and hostility, something that uh, you'd have to go back to the 1950s in the United States and read Ku Klux Klan material to see the parallels. That's what they were spreading through their media, and trying to create hatred among Sunnis towards Shias, and at the same time trying to make Salafism and Wahhabism um, takfiri, especially the violent takfiri variant, mainstream, which wasn't the case. I mean, I have Pakistani friends who are older now, who like 40 years ago, they would say that 40, 50 years ago, many people in Pakistan didn't even know if they were Sunni or Shia. There was, everyone would participate in the Ashura uh, programs for the martyrdom of the grandson of the Prophet. No one thought of, well, many people didn't even know if they were from one sect or another. But the Americans and their allies used this basically to prevent uh, the revolution from having influence, and it was, of course, an uh, anti-colonial, anti-imperialist revolution, and it was also anti-apartheid. So this divide that uh, was created by the West and its regional allies. And so sometimes when I meet people like they ask me some extraordinary questions about Shia, which is just you have a different Quran, or like the most crazy things are being spread among people about Shia Muslims, because this is the policy of divide and rule. The United States and its regional um, its client regimes, they have a lot of money and they will use it. And so you do see some people influenced by this, and some people have now so much hatred that it's difficult to change them. And there's a lot of people who have a vested interest. There's a lot of money involved in sectarianism, especially now that things are not going well for the United States and Israel. So, divide and rule will, especially as the empire grows weaker. I think it's a tool that they'll be needing more than ever before. But there's a lot of, you know, a lot has changed. The fact that Hezbollah, which is Shia, the fact that Ansarullah, which is Zaidi, but a it is Shia, but a different Shia group. Uh, they're the ones who've sacrificed the most for Palestine. I think has had a huge impact. And the fact that you know, rebels in Syria, these moderate rebels in Syria, have turned out to be such, horrific killers, I think has woken up people uh, across the world. The mood towards the understanding of what's happening in Syria today is very different from 2012, 13, 14, and 15. Back then, or 16 and 17, back then, it was they were just very small group of people who are trying to create awareness about the fact that these groups that the West is supporting, they are ISIS, they're Al Qaeda, they are extremists, they're tools in the hands of NATO. Now you see that this has become something that critics of U.S. foreign policy have widely acknowledged. You even see that U.S. officials like Tulsi Gabbard, although she's changed a lot over the past few weeks. Her position on Yemen has changed. Her position, she's changing very rapidly. But in any case, in the Senate confirmation hearings, she admitted basically what we were saying all along, that the United States was supporting Al Qaeda, that they were funding Al Qaeda. So it's not good for the Israeli regime right now. There's a lot more. Uh, there's a lot of much better appreciation of Hezbollah and the extraordinary role that Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah had played for the Palestinian people, and what Ansarullah is doing, and that brings nations together. And so I think the United States and its clients will redouble their efforts to intensify sectarian hatred and racial hatred.
Getting back to Iranian nuclear program and the talks between the United States and Iran, the foreign minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, he said in his latest interview, he said that the reality of Iranian nuclear program has changed drastically, and the nature of the way that Donald Trump and his administration are forcing Iranian has changed as well. Is that going to complicate the situation between Iran and the United States? Is that going to force them to negotiate? How these changes that have happened since the first term of Trump administration, Trump 1.0, and do you think these changes, after all, would help the process of negotiations, or would make somehow new barriers for negotiations?
I think that Iran has a much stronger hand today than it did back then. Iran's nuclear program is much more developed, thanks to Trump. Thanks to Trump, because of Trump, Iran halted its commitments to the nuclear deal. Again, Iran is fully committed to the NPT, and it abides by the legal framework that exists within the International Atomic Energy Agency. But the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, limited Iran's nuclear uh, uh, industry. So since Trump tore up the deal, Iran developed its nuclear industry. And so now Iran is one of the most advanced countries in the world when it comes to nuclear energy. It is probably in the top 10. And this is something that Trump will have to accept. Can't just say you have to give it up. That's never going to happen. We're not going to go back to 2015 anymore, because this is not the same nuclear program, as Dr. Arokci rightly pointed out. The second is that Iran's missile and drone capabilities are infinitely different from in the past. Iran's military capabilities are far greater than what they were. Iran has chosen a very smart route to make a strong, inexpensive, relatively speaking, high-tech military industry, which can defend the country. And I think, based on American and Western claims, we've seen that impact in Russia. We've seen, according to the Americans, that Iran drone capabilities, they're having a daily effect. So Iran's military is different today, and the United States is in a much tougher situation because of the global challenges with Russia and China, the the major problems that they face at home. So there is always a potential for a deal. There's always a potential for there's nothing uh, can be ruled out. But at the moment, because of the attitude of the United States, the Iranians have no interest in negotiating. If the United States changes its attitude and shows that it can be trusted at some point down the road, the Americans are going to have to take all of these into consideration. Trump was the person who weakened his own hand, partially at least, when it comes to the nuclear program itself.
Part of what Witkoff said in his interview was that the other option would be attacking Iran. In that sense, how is that going to be? How are we going to have the response coming out from Iran? What would be the response on the part of Iran?
Well, let's just look at the map. The Persian Gulf. Iran owns half of the Persian Gulf. That's why it's called the Persian Gulf, and the northern side. And it's not a very wide uh, piece of water. It's thin and long. And look at where U.S. bases are in, like in Qatar, in the Emirates, in Bahrain, in Kuwait. Well, if the United States attacks Iran, these tiny countries are all complicit. What does that mean for their future existence? I mean, if there's a war, and then their infrastructure is fair game. They can't. If the Americans attack Iranian infrastructure or military targets, that's war. And so these regimes won't last more than a few hours or a few days. And you would see chaos across the Persian Gulf region. And then there would be no more tankers. The tankers would all be at the bottom of the Persian Gulf. So no more oil, no more gas. And I'm sure in Iraq you will see the resistance preventing oil and gas getting to the West. Probably in the Republic of Azerbaijan, you would see similar moves of people outraged. That would create a global economic catastrophe that I think is historically unprecedented. And it's not something that the Americans can do about anything about. They can't do anything about it. I mean, look at Yemen. The Americans want to Yemen, which is, I mean, it's clear that Yemen's military capabilities are not are very small compared to Iran's military capabilities. I mean, the people of Yemen are heroic, they are brave, they are courageous, and they are the heroes alongside Hezbollah. They and Hezbollah sacrifice themselves for another people. That's unbelievable, what they've done and what they're doing. But Iran's military capabilities are second to none in the region, and the region is very, very sensitive because of oil and gas, and because of the petrochemical plants, and because of the refineries, and because of all the ships, and because of all the trade, and also because of all the desalination plants and all that. It's very vulnerable situation. These are all glass palaces. These are all glass mansions. War in this region would destroy the U.S. economy. And then imagine people on the move because the world economy will collapse. Imagine people on the move everywhere. And where will they probably go, even though the United States and Europe will collapse? They'll be going to the United States and Europe. The amount of people going now would be just a trickle compared to what we'll see if the global economy collapses. So I don't think that the United States wants this. I don't think that the military wants this. Of course, Netanyahu would love this. Fanatical Zionists, uh, ethno-supremacist madmen want this, but I don't think at the moment the U.S. military uh, would allow such a thing to happen. Nothing is for certain, but Trump is definitely not a very, how should I put it, stable person. You cannot. He may wake up in the morning and then suddenly say something different from what he was saying the night before. But I think that the stakes are simply too high for now. But again, I can't rule anything out. And if the United States strikes, then I think if it's serious, then I think the we will see people flee the Persian Gulf region before it happens. The rats will jump ship because they know that will be the end of these tiny regimes. So people will leave immediately. And I think the family members of the dictatorships, which have all their money or a lot of money in the West, they will be among the first to go.
Is there any room left for Russia and China participating in this ongoing process of, I don't know, somehow trying to negotiate between Iran and the United States, and most importantly, for the situation in Gaza, for the situation for Palestinians?
Well, when countries in the region refuse to sanction the Israeli regime, when they refuse to break off ties with the regime, when Erdogan is refusing to end trade and business with the regime, where he refuses to stop flights to Ben Gurion Airport, how can we expect China and Russia to make big steps in the right direction? If these regimes did take steps, then that would create an environment where other countries would do the same. But so far, none have done it. None of them have made a move. So, uh, but that aside, China and Russia obviously have a lot of influence, and they have a lot of ways. I mean, China needs stability in the Persian Gulf region, and just like everyone else. And China does not have an interest in war, especially for China. Iran is a bit different. You see, for example, the Emirates. Their number one trading partner is China, but then they go on to tell the Americans that we're going to do all of our investments in the United States. And that, of course, is not something that pleases the Chinese. So for China, Iran is very important because Iran is independent. They can trust Iran. Iran is not going to obey the United States when it pushes policies that are anti-Chinese. But the countries on the other side of the Persian Gulf will abide by American demands, more or less. So China wants a stable Persian Gulf region. China also wants has an interest in having independent actors in the Persian Gulf region be strong. So China and Russia do have a role to play. Again, this is all speculation. At the moment, China continues to buy Iranian oil, and it has refused to abide by U.S. demands. Things have changed since 8 years ago. Uh, China is stronger today. China recognizes that listening to the United States only makes it worse, and the United States comes back with new demands every time they back down. China is more independent of the United States now. They do less trade because of the U.S. sanctions and tariffs. So China has diversified its trade with other countries. So it's less vulnerable. And so, unlike during the previous Trump regime, China's trade with Iran is much stronger now. Russia's relationship with Iran is very different from back then. Russia back then was much weaker than it was now. It's the United States has been declining, the West has been declining, Russia and China and global South have been rising. The situation is different today than in the past. So Iran has a strong hand for the reasons that I've mentioned, and adding these two also. But it's going to be a very complicated situation in our region. As long as the root issue is the ethnic cleansing, the slaughter of the Palestinian people, which the United States supports and the West collectively supports, even though they're divided over Russia. They all support the slaughter of women and children in Gaza, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians in the West Bank. And as the more this continues, I think the more dangerous the region becomes for the West. And I'm not talking about Iran, I'm talking about instability, broader instability.
Thank you so much, Professor Marandi, for being with us today. Great pleasure, as always.
Thank you very much for having me.